values as applied to the problem of living together. Not at all. In fact, what we've done is displace these religious concepts and put them into various places. Interestingly, on this question of representation,
by piggybacking on essentially religious narratives, so it's the translation of a Christian providential idea into an Enlightenment idea. But that's really what the idea of a progressivist idea of history is one that has its roots in religious narratives, in our traditions within Christianity, and the idea that their history is something with a right side and a wrong side, as Obama will insist. This is the purportedly secular embodiment of a certain religious worldview, and that faith is what's required in order for a polity to sustain a belief in itself. The extraordinary thing about certain polities like the US is that belief is still sustained, despite the cynicism, despite the money. That civil religion is still remarkably robust.
Much more so in the US, it seems to me, and rather anecdotally, and by from living there a short period of time, much more so than in it seems to me, a much more damaged polity of the UK, for example. I mean, and maybe it lives on also in France with the religion of the Republic and the revolutionary values of as well. But I think that you make occasional passing references to growing up in the UK in the 1970s, and it seems to me that that is actually a sort of exercise in a polity that really no longer, but in which it's faith, the polity of a crumbling faith, to a remarkable extent.
I mean, it bewilders me. That's why I left. I mean, it's interesting watching from an American perspective the Murdoch thing unravel, and what's surprising to most American commentators is in what is an overwhelmingly corrupt polity, the US. The degree of corruption and complicity, and the fact that all these people knew each other, we're all living in the same villages. This is astonishing to most American commentators. So yeah.
But it's important to say I think people listening to this might think that what the book is, that this book is about demythologizing, is about exposing these religious aspects. Actually, it's not. It's not only that. There is some of that, and occasionally you say, well, we must demythologize, but actually you also embrace the religious, let's call them, the religious aspect of politics, and in particular, to where your own preferences seem to be. You in somewhat with a little bit of guardedness, you come out very strongly for what you call the mystical anarchist strand of political thought. Can you?
Strange enough, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's diagnostic in the sense in which we need to think about the policies that we live in, and demythologization is hugely important, and that's the task of history. It seems to me, and the importance of history. To understand the way in which the civil religion, say, of the United States was constructed by people like Madison in order to break down this twofold identity that many people had in the 13 original colonies, which was a local identity of being Virginian or a Rhode Islander or a Connecticutian, and secondarily having a British identity. And those two strong identities had to be broken down with a third new identity, what it meant to be American. And that required a different understanding of representation, namely that in many of those states like Rhode Island, they had quite robust local democratic traditions. That had to be broken down in the name of a broader idea of a less representative idea of representative democracy that Madison was basing on Hume. Interestingly enough.
Oh yes, very interesting. You note there that actually that there's a sort of highly practical argument there for large constituencies. Madison's argument following Hume is that what large constituencies will do is they'll make sure that the right elites are voted in, and they will make sure that these local allegiances are cut across. These local attachments are subsumed into a big tent.
And that's the way. I mean, the way in which politics still functions here is a question of. I mean, it's a question still of, to quote Madison, of having the appearance of democracy without the inconveniences of democracy. And the inconveniences of democracy would be actual popular sovereignty. We need to have the appearance of democracy that maintains something like monarchical rule, or rule by an elite that was, in Madison's time, an agrarian elite, and which rapidly became a plutocratic elite, which of course still governs American society. So that's the diagnostic side. That's hugely important. But I'm not doing that in a sort of spirit of, we need to have the veil of Maya pulled from our eyes.
Yes.
And another thinker that I'm very sympathetic with, although critical of in the book, is John Gray. And John Gray does another wonderful job of sticking it to liberalism, but that's not done in the name. I mean, the way John Gray will take that will be in the name of what he calls political realism, which is a kind of Burkean, old-style conservatism based on tradition, and if something is broken, then don't. If something isn't broken, then don't fix it, don't replace it. Whereas I take the idea of, this is where I go back to Rousseau. I take the diagnostic idea of that politics requires something like the apparatus of a civil religion, and then say, well, what might such a civil religion be for us, or how might we think about that? And I then discuss various options in the book, but mystical anarchism is the weirdest of them, and I sort of picked that up from again a spirit of a contrarian spirit through. I picked that up from Norman Cohn's work and his book The Pursuit of the Millennium, which I read at the suggestion of John Gray. Actually, he got me onto that, and there the issue is for Cohn, mystical anarchism is what has to be avoided. Right?
Yes, he's very critical. He's sort of rather psychoanalytic, isn't he, in his rejection of the in the sickness of mysticism? Yes,
he's got this sort of 60s depth psychology critique of what he calls mystical anarchism, which is his way of bundling together and criticizing forms of 60s radicalism in particular. Now, I take what he says seriously, but I went back into the sources of this and came to some slightly different conclusions. So I'm not a fully paid up mystical anarchist.
Well, you say that at several points in the book. You say I have my reservations, etc. But you're never very clear. You state that you have reservations, but actually they don't shine through. I have to say, from the in the writing. I mean, you don't come clean on what you think those reservations are. So but first describe mystical anarchism, and maybe do it through this wonderful woman. I mean, Marguerite Porete, and her and the heresy of the free spirit. I mean, it's an absolutely wonderful argument, and an extremely anti-authoritarian argument that she has about the way in which the self, or the identity of the self, the soul, and God.
Yeah, as Carl Schmitt says somewhere, there are two main alternatives to liberalism: authoritarianism and anarchism. And he obviously favoured forms of authoritarianism. And authoritarianism always tends to flow from an idea that human nature is essentially wicked and corrupt. And if we don't have the authority of government, then we'll just tear each other to pieces. We therefore require the mortal god of the Leviathan. The anarchist tradition begins from the opposite assumption that human beings have the potential for goodness, and if they're allowed to act in concert independently of law, bureaucracy, and the state, then good things might come of that.